probably get a few more folks started, but why don't we go ahead and jump in. Welcome everyone. We are so glad to have you all here as part of the Effective Implementation Cohort webinar series. We're here today to talk about engaging students and caregivers in Buffalo Public Schools and Pasadena Unified School District. And we're really excited to highlight the stories of these two districts as they engaged and continue to engage student and caregiver voice in their math curriculum implementation process. Do you want to jump to the next slide, Ryan? Thank you. All right, so a few reminders for today. I see we have a few more people coming into the room. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to say hi in the chat and share something that you hope to learn today. Throughout today's webinar, feel free to use the chat to ask any questions if you'd like. We'll try to keep an eye on those. There will be plenty of time as well for questions. And keep an eye out in the chat for a link to the Engaging Students and Caregivers brief. We highly encourage you to read that if you have not done so already. I believe Rebecca will drop that in the chat shortly once we've got a good number of introductions from folks in there. Next slide. And you might be wondering who I am. I am Stephanie Kennedy, an implementation specialist at NIRN and part of the Effective Implementation Cohort project and a supporting author on the brief. We're very excited to have several folks with us today from our EIC provider TNTP, as well as the Pasadena and Buffalo school districts. So I'd love to take a moment and let folks introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Nadira Nayo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadira Nayo, and I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction, Professional Development, and EdTech here in Pasadena Unified School District. Robert.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Hernandez, Director of Planning, Innovation, Accountability in Special Projects. I think that's the longest title in our district. And I'm also in Pasadena Unified. So nice to see everyone. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jadon Wagstaff. I'm the Director of Mathematics for Buffalo Public Schools. I oversee mathematics for grades K through 12.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amanda Waite, and I am a teacher on special assignment with Buffalo Public Schools and work within grade 6 for the Gates grant.
Hi, I'm Ryan Kappa. I'm an analyst with TNTP, and I support both projects in Buffalo and Pasadena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jency Knicherel, and I am the director on the PUSD side, and I am joining you with TNTP.
Hi, everyone. Amy Shaw. I am also a director on TNTP, and I am Jency's counterpart on the Buffalo side.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kendall Sullivan. I work at TNTP as a senior manager on the Pasadena side.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Hardaway. I'm a senior manager at TNTP working on the Pasadena side.
Hi, everybody. I'm Suzanne Marks, a partner also at TNTP, and I support the Pasadena team.
Hi, everybody. Kit Tollerson, and I'm the partner supporting the Buffalo side of the work.
All right, thank you, everyone. We have a mighty team here with us, and we're so glad to have these fantastic folks here today to tell their stories. But before I let them take it away, just want to give a brief overview of the EIC project and its focus. The Effective Implementation Cohort, or the EIC, is a project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it's designed to help school districts across the country implement an instructional system that supports using a high-quality middle school math curriculum. We pop to the next slide. The aims of the EIC are to increase school districts' capacity to implement a high-quality middle grade math curriculum, to accelerate learning for students experiencing poverty, Black and Latino and/or English learner designated students. And as part of this work, the EIC will learn and share with others outside of the project what districts need to have in place for effective implementation, what aspects of implementation at the district and school level most benefit priority students, and the work involved in making site-wide implementation successful. Next slide. And you can find more information about the EIC, including our cohort-wide learning plan, learning agenda, and more on our website, which will be shared with you in the chat. Thank you, Rebecca. So with that, I know you're all ready and raring to hear from our TNTP and our district folks, so I'm going to pass the mic to them to dive in.
Thanks, Stephanie. We're looking forward to speaking to everyone today. In this webinar, we're going to talk a lot about the community stakeholder engagement we've engaged in over the last 2 years and are continuing into the 3rd year. So just a couple of quick points that we'll hit today. We'll discuss the purpose and organization of the focus groups that we engaged in. We'll share a little bit about the findings and feedback from each of the stakeholder groups and each of the sites that we conducted these in. We'll describe some changes and evolutions that are being made both by the district and by our team based on stakeholder feedback that we've heard so far. And we'll articulate again how the stakeholder engagement process has evolved into year 3. We'll learn a little bit about those in a couple of different ways here. But for now, I'm going to pass to Kendall, who's going to share the next.
Thanks, Ryan. Before we jump into talking about our work that we have been doing and will continue doing this year, we want to share a little bit about the context of TNTP and the districts that we're partnering with through the work of the grant. So first of all, who is TNTP? We are a national education nonprofit founded in 1997 with a mission to achieve justice in education by providing every K-12 student with equitable educational opportunities. We partner with states, districts, schools, leaders, community members, caregivers, students, and teachers to work towards the goal of making sure that all students have access to opportunities and resources. In our 26 years, we've reached over 10,000 school systems and 32.4 million students across 44 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. I'm now going to pass it over to Kit and Suzanne, who are our TNTP partners that you just heard from, to share a bit more about the district partnerships. So Kit, let's start with Buffalo.
Hi again, everybody. So TNTP has had the privilege of partnering with Buffalo Public Schools in a variety of capacities over the years. But we've been working very closely with the math department for the last couple of years through the EIC grant. The work is focused on building content knowledge and instructional skill set for 6th grade math teachers specifically. And in that work, we've had a close partnership from Dawn Wagstaff, the director of math, as well as her team and the assistant superintendent for instruction, Kelly Bauda.
A little context on our partnership with Pasadena. TNTP and Pasadena have been collaborating since the pandemic days when Pasadena showed interest in learning acceleration and thinking about how to ensure all kids were getting access to grade level content. So we really started our partnership with that vision in mind and focused our efforts around their implementation of iReady classroom mathematics. And together we work to build capacity with all middle school teachers, coaches, and administrators through monthly professional learning cycles, where we think about not only how to implement the materials with integrity, but also to think about school-wide and district-wide agreements about how students will conceptualize math. And our goal is to build the capacity of all middle school teachers over the 3 years with a continuous improvement model. A little bit about why we decided to put our energy into focus groups.
Yeah, so we started focus groups for a particular reason in each of the districts. One, because we wanted to aim at tracking progress towards grant and organizational goals. It was a way for us to continuously monitor team progress across both sites to see how close we were hitting some of the ambitious goals that we set in year one and how we needed to refine or strategically alter them moving forward to ensure that we were meeting the needs of each group. We also wanted to develop deeper community stakeholder engagement in Pasadena and Buffalo. We singled out these two groups, students and caregivers, because their voices weren't traditionally heard through some of the other metrics or weren't as prominent in the first couple of years. So we wanted to invest students and caregivers in the implementation efforts and really make them partners in everything that we were doing. And then as we talked about in the brief, it was really another means to triangulate the data across all the activities in the grant. We wanted to examine intersections of survey data with classroom observation data, what students and caregivers were saying, what we heard and saw in teachers' classrooms, what we were learning in our teacher learning cycles and professional development sessions. It was a way to ground everything and center it together so that we had this to refer to in years 2, years 3, and beyond for the districts. So that's why we did it. Before we jump into some deeper questions and some deeper learnings about what we found out through these focus groups, we wanted to first ask everyone here a question. So we're going to launch a poll that's also up on the screen now. And we'll flash it out for everyone to respond to. But the poll question is simple: community stakeholder engagement is realistic in your work, right?
I think we have everybody. Nope. You guys are doing really well though on responses. I've about 10 more people maybe, and then we will share results. All right, just a couple more seconds.
Great. So most people fell in the strongly agree or agree bucket. So great to hear that everyone feels like this is something that's realistic in their work right now. We hope that over the course of the next 45 minutes that you learn some new strategies or learn how we integrated it and can take that and apply it in different ways. But really excited to see that everyone feels like this is something that could happen in their work right now. What we'll do now is hear from a couple of people across the TNTP team and the Buffalo and Pasadena team through a panel. So we're going to talk through what we did in years 1, years 2, and years 3 through a series of different topics from a series of different people. So I'm going to pass it over to Kendall again, who's going to moderate our panel. We'll all be chiming in at different points to answer various questions.
Thanks, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, we are going to talk in panel format about the work that we've been doing and the work we're going to do. We had introductions at the beginning, but you can see here the folks that you will hear from throughout the panel, folks from Pasadena, Buffalo, as well as our TNTP team. We will have time for questions after the panel. However, please feel free to enter questions you have in the chat as we go. We have someone who is going to be gathering those questions, and we will also start to address them at the beginning of the Q&A. If you also have a particular question for a certain person on the panel, please feel free to put that in your question so that we can make sure to ask it to that person directly when we get to the Q&A portion. All right, so we are going to start with year 1. So as Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, we are in year 3 at this point. We've already been doing 2 years of work, and this is our 3rd and final year of the grant. So we're going to start our panel with some questions around year 1, including the logistics, structures, and the learnings that we had from focus groups in year 1. So our first question is, what are some important considerations for ensuring all stakeholders have access to engage in a focus group?
Thanks, Kendall. So we have 3 concrete strategies that we want to put in front of folks today. The first being keeping accessibility at the center of our conversations with students and kids. So that includes making sure that your materials are translated into the audience languages that you are hoping to reach. In our case, Spanish. We worked with schools and districts to provide real-time interpretation services as well. So whether we're online or in person, there are interpretation services available to attendees, which makes the content and the conversation far more accessible and representative of folks' perceptions, irrespective of their native language. We also work to ensure that if kids were participating in student focus groups, that they didn't miss instructional time, and also we didn't interrupt lunch or nutrition periods. We provided folks with multiple options for dates and times. So we tried early morning before school, caregiver focus groups, middle of the day, so folks could step out of work and attend the conversations during lunch. And then late evening, 6 or 7 o'clock is what we've heard works best for folks. That's when bedtime and dinner time are over. So making sure that you're considering those options as you're planning. Additionally, providing hybrid options, considering travel limitations, et cetera, having a virtual option available to folks who would like to have their voice heard, but can't necessarily show up to a school site at any given time of the day. So making sure those options exist for you. And then finally, if you are going to have an in-person event, ensuring that that's a centralized location. In Pasadena, we held these conversations at district offices and specific schools that were surrounded by other large community groups that we were trying to target. So considering those options as well. If you can provide free parking, if you can provide a comfortable meeting space with ample seating, and also making sure that the environment is welcoming, familiar, there are folks greeting caregivers. All of those tiny details really matter in making sure that folks feel safe to enter the conversation. So in addition to accessibility, you also want to think about compensation. While we weren't able to build that into our budget for Pasadena and BPS, we did provide food, refreshments, and I think the thing we want to lift up here as a lesson learned is if you are going to conduct caregiver engagement activities, you want to make sure that you're compensating folks for even something as small as responding to surveys. That is time, and we know from research that if you are compensating activities, you're going to get increased participation, and likewise you're going to reach a more diverse representative audience, and so making sure that that's building in compensation as part of your planning and preparation process for engagement activities makes a ton of sense. And then finally, 360 communication, making sure that whether you're engaging students or caregivers, they understand what you as an organization learned from the conversations, and also what you plan to do as a result of the conversation. So for students, that was a simple flyer. And for caregivers, that's been a newsletter that we release with commitments that the districts are making in response to what they heard at the conversations. I'm going to pass it back to Kendall.
Thanks so much, Jency. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that I know Jency just said a lot of really great information, and there's going to be a lot of other information you're going to hear. We will be able to provide you all with some notes and like a summary of some of these thoughts after the presentation, just so that you know, in case you're worried about writing it all down. All right, let's jump into our second question, which is, how did you get started with focus groups in year one?
Thanks, Kendall. As I noted before, We wanted to highlight groups whose voices were not as prominent, or in some cases not necessarily heard from, just based on the way things were being done. And so we landed on engaging caregivers in implementation efforts and picking up on students in a different way beyond the surveys that were already being given, because we learned a lot of helpful information from the student survey that was distributed, and we wanted to supplement that knowledge so that we were getting touch points throughout the year. So in Pasadena in year one, we invited students and caregivers to participate in a series of focus groups in the spring. We started with student focus groups in each of the 6 middle schools that we're working in. And in year one, we engaged 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And we tried to get at least two grades in each of the 6 middle schools. And so I think we ended up talking to about 14 groups in that first year, made up of about 8 to 10 students per group, and we brought them in for 45-minute sessions, which we knew was about as much time as we could keep their attention and not withhold them from their relevant classes that they needed to get back to. So generally they arrived, we outlined what the purpose of the focus groups was, we allowed them to ask any questions to us, and then we asked them a series of questions focused on really 3 or 4 overarching topics and a series of sub-questions beneath that. So we centered our questions around overall math experiences throughout the year, how they were doing, what they learned, how confident they felt in retaining their information, whether their teacher taught them how to solve problems in more than one way. We also asked them about the types of support they were receiving, both from their teachers or throughout the schools. And we asked them a little bit about their math teacher, perceptions of their math teacher's ability, how often they were allowed to participate in group work, whether they felt comfortable asking their teacher a question, and whether their teacher had high expectations for them, which were similar topics to what were asked in the EIC student survey, so that we could dig deeper into some of those focal areas. We also know that, as Jency mentioned, providing snacks and information about purpose and sharing back their findings was key to getting buy-in and crucial to showing that we really had our best intentions and wanted to make math more engaging and more fun for them throughout the year. And then once we got done talking with students in schools, each night we hosted a set of caregiver focus groups across the district, and we also hosted one at lunchtime, and then we offered virtual sessions after that. Working with the district, we sent out an invitation to all middle school caregivers to participate in an in-person session. We sent out an RSVP form to find out how many people were interested in coming, when the best time was, what they needed from us to participate fully. We invited them to 1-hour sessions, and in some cases they ran long because people had questions for us, and we took them and did the best we could to answer them and pulled in our district support people when we were needed. And just like we asked students, we asked similar questions to parents around what their child's math experience was like, the supports they were providing at home, what else they would like to see in the district, and just to get a sense of what they thought of implementation efforts across the district. And then we carried over those findings into year 2 and made some slight alterations, which we'll talk about later.
Thanks, Ryan. Third question, how did you leverage partnerships with the districts to get focus groups going?
So I think like this is one of those things that is really important in terms of figuring out how to increase access and ensuring that you're reaching a wide audience. Jency kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but one of the things that I know in Pasadena they did was really reach out through, there were already student groups that were formed in the middle school. And so utilizing those student groups as a way to get the word out and let kids know that there was an interest in hearing their voices. And then similarly, there are things like parent affinity groups or parent associations being reached out to across the board in both districts. And so not only like finding the structures that were already in place and reaching out to those structures, but also then relying on not only the district, but the building staff. Like school coaches were an integral part in supporting, in identifying students who would give like, who would create a diverse population to get input from. And then we really focused on trying to keep it to the priority students as defined by the grant. So Black and African American voices, Latinx voices, we wanted to make sure we included students with thinking and learning differences, as well as multilingual learners. And so really making sure that we were trying to get across those different populations. And then I know this is something to keep in mind, and just like put out there as something to be aware of, right? For Buffalo particularly, one of the limitations was we were only able to do student focus groups with students who had turned in a permission slip. So again, depending on your state and regulations and things like that, those are things you need to consider before planning this out, is like what needs to be done in terms of permission slips. And same with Buffalo, we made sure that permission slips were in multiple languages to try and really broaden our reach in terms of who would be able to participate in a focus group. And then with caregivers, it's kind of, Ryan talked a little bit about some of the big things that we did to really ensure that our partnerships were leveraged. So talking to, not only offering several different options and formats, so in-person versus virtual, different times of day, but also really trying to get in touch with and work with representatives from different parent associations or affinity groups. And then finally, the sending out of the RSVP to get the survey. The RSVP survey really helped in understanding what times would be ideal for that particular community or that particular group of parents and caregivers. And then also what format was preferred. And so being able to customize based on the survey was, I think, a really important step.
Thanks, Amy. So our final question around year one is, after doing all of these things, what was the most valuable or interesting finding in the data?
So a couple of things stood out to us when we rolled up the data and leaned into what we heard from students. Probably somewhat unsurprisingly, we heard that they wanted more group work and that there was a significant lack of group work or group projects during their class time. They wanted more time to engage with their peers, both in tactile activities or other math relevant real world type projects. And they also wanted time to engage in student to student discourse around mathematics. The second thing that we heard and was reiterated in subsequent years was that students really acknowledged that their behavior and their classmates' behavior has an impact on learning, and they wanted their teachers to address this so that they could get back to learning in their classroom. And then third, they expressed a deep need for culturally relevant content, both work that was connected to their interests and things they like to do, but also who they were as people. Their cultural groups, their heritage, and things that made them excited about mathematics. For caregivers, the most prominent thing that stood out was just the desire to have access to and understand student data. For example, getting their diagnostic scores and learning what that meant, where they needed additional support, how they could help their students at home. And then closely tied to that, just the amount of support that they were providing outside of school hours and math. And this was coming off of COVID, where things were obviously very different, but parents and caregivers were really providing untold hours of support to their students, either by themselves or by leaning in on outside tutors. And they really wanted to catch up their students and accelerate their learning and make sure that they weren't losing out on the gains that they had made prior to COVID and prior to going to remote learning. So that's what stood out to us in year one, and some of these carried on into subsequent years, and some other findings were different after that.
Thanks so much, Ryan. So there you can see all the questions that we just asked. And again, you will have access to the answers after. We're now going to move into year 2, where we started thinking more specifically around the district responses to the information we gathered in year 1, as well as the supports that went out thanks to that information. So if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so our first question for year 2 is, what did you learn from the initial focus groups?
Thanks, Kendall. Again, just an extension beyond what were the most interesting learnings, but other things we heard from these initial focus groups in Pasadena and in Buffalo was that students did believe that their teachers were nice, supportive, possessed high expectations for them, thought that they would be successful, could do the math in their classrooms. As we mentioned, they desired more opportunities to engage in content and activities connected to the real world or their interests and identity, desire to participate in group works and discussions. Most students also reported feeling very confident about retaining their learnings over time. So we posed this question on, like, if a teacher went back to a topic you learned at the beginning of the year, do you feel like you could answer it? How confident would you feel in answering a question from the beginning of the year? And most students, not all of them, but a majority indicated that they felt good about what they were learning and that they could take a question from the beginning of the year and respond to it. And then one other thing that was heard across an overwhelming amount of students was just the fact that their teachers were showing them multiple ways to solve a problem. And they weren't just saying, this is the one way you do it, and here's how you should do it moving forward, that there were many ways that you could solve one problem. And in most cases, students also pointed out that their teachers were comfortable letting them pick the method that they could use to solve the problem, whatever one they felt most comfortable with. From caregivers, again, the access to data and just the ways to understand it, ways to see it, ways to get it in their hands and use it to support them outside of the school. More communication from teachers has been an overwhelming finding across focus groups over the years. Parents and caregivers just wanted to hear from their teachers how their students were doing, whether it was good or bad, whether they were succeeding in math or whether they needed more support. It was just that time spent either via email, face-to-face communication, over the phone. They just wanted to hear from their teachers so they could have a better understanding of what their students were doing and how they were doing it. There was a lot of outside support being provided by tutors. Again, some of that was probably the result of COVID and some remote learning taking place, but we've also heard this since the transition back to face-to-face classroom, in-person instruction, that tutors are still being leaned on to help accelerate learning or make up strides in areas where students are not meeting the standards. And that parents too also wanted more group work and engaging activities in their child's class. Caregivers were expressly telling us that their students were coming home and using phrases like, the math is boring, we just needed to do more. And so they pushed for this desire for their students to engage in group work and participate with one another more clearly.
Thank you, Ryan. The next couple of questions are going to be aimed at our district partners, but before I ask this one, just want to highlight, I did see a question in the chat. Just a reminder, we are just gathering those and we'll address them in the Q&A section. So definitely feel free to continue dropping your questions and we'll make sure to answer them at the end. All right, so our next question is, how have you, the districts, responded to focus group feedback from caregivers and students?
Myself. Hi. So in Pasadena, as you heard from Ryan, our students were saying that they needed more meaningful interaction with one another through hands-on experiences and collaboration. So thinking about this, what we did is we have site-based coaches at each one of our schools, instructional coaches. So we had them meet individually with the teachers and post survey and to really discuss the feedback and how students were feeling, what their thoughts were, and to come up with plans on how teachers could actually help implement some of this stuff. whether it was providing the manipulatives. Our teacher said, well, we need more training on that. So our specialist, math specialist, district math specialist, Kimberly Knudsen, she has provided training along with this for them, along with our curriculum associates. We also, what we did is we highlighted these student needs with the school leaders so that they could also support teachers, because if the leaders know what the students are saying, then they can also support teachers, because we also understand that for teachers to do things that are outside of their comfort zone, they needed to know that it was okay if things didn't look quite as right, if their their principal came into the room. It was okay if it looked a little messy. It was okay doing these things. So the idea was to let everyone know that this was going on. And then finally, one of the most critical things that we did was to share out the student findings via posters and handouts, as I think Ryan had said, and also Jency. Now, the posters were interesting because oftentimes what happens is we do focus groups with students, or this has happened, maybe not in your setting, but in our setting sometimes, and we gather information and no one knows what's happened to it. So we took posters and had them created and posted in high traffic areas in the schools so that they were visible to all educational partners who were there, including as well as the students. So you could see all the questions that were asked and kind of that, what were the results of that. And then for the students to understand that we heard you, we hear what you're saying, and this is what we're trying to do about it. As far as our caregivers are concerned, as Brian said, they really, one of the biggest things was about the data. They didn't understand the iReady platform, the diagnostic, what it meant. What do these reports mean when I'm getting home from my student, from my teacher? So we worked with curriculum associates to provide parent learning sessions, and we started communicating those a little bit more frequently, such as, when are the testing windows? That was another thing that came out with parents. They were like, well, if I know the testing windows, then I understand that maybe my students shouldn't be staying up till, midnight the night before, or maybe I can talk to them about, doing their best, as this is coming up. In addition, we were involving more of our community groups in the implementation process, reaching out to our African American Parent Council, our DLAC groups on what they thought that we could do.
Thank you, Nadira. And now would someone from Buffalo like to speak to this question?
Sure. So one of the main things we took away from our student focus groups was there was an overwhelming feeling of positivity as it related to their teachers. They felt like their teachers did think that they were capable, that they were able to do the work. However, students requested that teachers slow down. Give us more time to try to do it before you show us. So one of the things that we did in our professional learning was to really model instructional strategies for teachers that would give them a way of engaging kids in the math and giving kids time to explore their options, come up with solution pathways, debrief and share what they thought, as opposed to, here's the problem, here's 3 minutes to do it, now let me model for you how it's done. So listening to the students in terms of, you think we can do it, but you have to give us time to try. So that was one of our biggest takeaways. One of the other things that we really focused on with our teachers was explicitly showing them how to use the engagement strategies. So modeling routines for them, and then showing them how to use engagement strategies in the classroom with the students. We've gone so far as to this year, do a model lesson with them to embed those things so that they could be the participant as opposed to the adult in professional learning. As far as our caregivers, one of the main things that they enlightened us about was that there are other ways to reach parents than the traditional ways that schools are using right now. Parents have all kinds of, unbeknownst to us, other face groups that we need to tap into because once you reach those groups, you will be pulling in the parents who are very outspoken and who will spread the word of what you're doing. The parents that we met with came in kind of apprehensive because they didn't know exactly what they were getting into. And then when they were able to open up, just an open, honest conversation about their experiences with math, their child's current experiences with math, and talking about how things are so different now and they want to help, but they just don't know how. So them telling us, if you tap into these other groups, there will be more parents that will come along and you will have a greater impact. So those are the ways in which we are trying to respond. One of the groups, one of the organizations, a community center has already reached out. We're trying to schedule with them to do a parent night.
Thank you, Jadon. That's really helpful. Next question is, again, to our district partners. How are coaches supported to address student and caregiver needs? And how is the district marshaling strategic resources to ensure coaches can be responsive to the stakeholder feedback?
So here in Pasadena, I have the unique perspective of kind of putting together our local plan. So the first question, I think we all know that there are challenges that manifest in the classroom as a result of a lot of things outside post-COVID. And so for us, really supporting coaches, addressing those needs, we've marshaled resources to having RTI wellness teachers as well as community liaisons to really engage and support students and families based on some of the feedback we were hearing. One thing that we did hear through our LCAP, which is our local plan, we conduct a survey, and one thing that resonated was just professional development. So really providing more time both with our caregivers and also with our teachers. And so we've hired elective teachers to provide a more robust, more predictable PLC time for our teachers and our coaches to engage. Additionally, just opening up more opportunities during the school day for them to collaborate. And again, just providing those options during the day, utilizing the resources that we have to open up and allow that time to happen for our teachers. And so, just utilizing, a lot of our state funding, but also a lot of our one-time funds to make this happen, and then look forward to how we can additionally support that.
Thank you so much. Our final question for this set around year 2 and findings and supports is, what are the challenges and lessons learned of facilitating stakeholder engagement activities like focus groups?
Thanks, Kendall. So like some of you heard from my colleagues, students have so much to say that is incredibly helpful for us to learn from them. And one of the things that we learned very early on is about how do we create an environment that's safe for students to share. So one of the first things that is at the top of my mind is collaborating with schools to make sure that we have a mix of students. So not taking students who all have the same teacher when possible, or students who are in the same class, because we don't want students to feel like their thoughts can be connected back to them. So making sure that we are mindful of how groups are set up. Also, like being able to do an icebreaker to create an atmosphere that's really welcoming for students is really important. We also want to think about structures like how many students are in focus groups. We found that 8 to 10 is ideal. When the groups get bigger than that, it can be a bit distracting, where students who are a little more shy feel like it can be kind of challenging to have their voices heard. The other thing to think about is that a lot of times students have things that are really helpful to share, but it might take a little bit more prompting. So when a student says something that is quite profound, sometimes you find that they don't they don't lean in as much as you would like them to. So giving them that encouraging nod and asking a follow-up question can be really helpful. Another thing that comes to mind is making sure that you prioritize the questions that get students speaking the most and allows you the space to ask those follow-up questions. And then the last thing that I would say is that sometimes it's helpful to give students a minute to process the question. We want to be mindful of different learning styles. So sometimes it's a little bit helpful to have students think about what the question means, think about what some of the experiences are. So it's okay for them to have a few minutes to discuss the question with a partner before sharing out in a larger group. And then, as always, snacks. Let students eat and be comfortable when it's possible. Thanks, Kendall.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, there was a homemade honey bun cake that some students got at the last focus group that was a huge hit. So food definitely is helpful, particularly for middle school students. All right. We're now going to transition to our final set of questions, which is about year 3, the year that we're currently in. And so during this set, we're going to ask about the evolution of community stakeholder engagement efforts. And based on all this information we've learned and lessons that we've learned, what is happening in year 3 and beyond. So our first question in this section is, based on focus group findings and reflection, what design changes are you making in year 3?
We'll split this one, and we have a lot to share from a couple of different people here, so I'll jump in and start. We heard in Pasadena from sets of 6th and 7th grade students last year, and we'd incorporated 8th grade students in overall. And this year we began the fall by working with 8th grade teachers. And given that we'd heard consistent feedback from students across the first 2 years, we decided to make a design change to how focus groups were being run. And so throughout the 2023-2024 school year, we're following a cohort of 8th grade students throughout the year to gain insight into teacher practices and how those changes are being made as they participate in our learning cycles and cycles of continuous improvement. So we're meeting with anywhere from 8 to 12 students at each of the 6 middle schools, and we're meeting with them 3 times throughout the year, in the fall, winter, and spring, when we're doing classroom observations as well. In between the times that we meet with them, they're going to take 5 surveys per semester. We're going to ask the same 9 questions each time, geared at responding to some of the consistent feedback we heard around getting to work in groups. Is the content connected to interests or identities? What's the teacher doing in the classroom? And we're going to track to see what changes exist across those questions over time. And we're doing one-on-one interviews in the winter and the spring with some of these students who are participating. We really wanted to ensure that students were going to participate throughout the whole year. So we asked at the beginning of the year for instructional coaches and teachers to recommend certain students who would participate from each of our priority groups for Black or African American, Latinx students, multilingual learners, students with learning and thinking differences, so we could get their feedback and incorporate it within. We asked for their caregiver consent to participate in these processes, in all these processes and practices. We're hoping that we see over time a true buy-in, and they were really engaged when we went with them this first time in the fall. So we're looking forward to what they say in each of these surveys moving forward. We're also going to focus, actually, I'm going to pass this to Erica, who has the next point to talk about.
Thanks, Ryan. We'd also like to focus on engaging multilingual learners through focus groups to build an understanding of their academic and social experiences, as well as to better target their specific assets and supports. Thanks. I'll pass it back to you, Ryan.
I'd like to add just a couple of things that we're going to do also. Is now our biggest, I would say one of our largest challenge was getting the priority groups, families involved in the focus groups. We would get some of them, but they were not the majority of those groups. And so we're trying to find ways by engaging those caregivers through our district engagement group, which is our family engagement group. And Nancy Molina, who's the new coordinator there, she has some great ideas about some innovative ways of how to expand that reach. And she gave us some ideas about making 1 to 2 minute segments on something and posting it on their website. Thinking about re-engaging, we have community liaisons at each one of our schools, having them do the outreach. So I think that having that and the idea of having it on our Canvas pages, we can monitor the views on the website, who's been going in, because there's kind of a little login that goes on there. And I think that might help us also.
Thanks so much, Nadira. And speaking to Buffalo, where we'll be jumping into year 2 of community stakeholder engagement and focus groups and engaging parents and caregivers in different ways, we're going to increase the number of student focus groups with students, potentially across more schools this year, now that we'll have more time to engage. As Jadon mentioned before, we're going to continue that outreach and really solicit feedback from different community organizations who can bring caregivers into the work. And then we're also going to send out an additional survey in early fall to all middle school caregivers in 6th grade, just to ask some generic questions. We know it's often challenging to participate in focus groups, whether they're held in person or virtually. So as another way to get feedback and engage parents who can't come to these meetings or who can't connect with us that way, we're going to bring in their feedback and work to really incorporate that throughout.
Thanks, Ryan. Our second question. So we are currently in year 3 of the grant. However, the grant work is going to be coming to a close pretty soon. So thinking for our district partners, how will districts sustain these activities that we're talking about after the grant work is complete?
Here in Pasadena, what we want to do is we started reading a book called Street Data. And not only us, when I say us, I mean our site leaders, they've been reading it. Our instructional coaches have been reading it. We've been kind of looking at that data. So we really find that the focus group area and getting those getting that student input is really, really important. So we're using that when we do our classroom focus walkthroughs. So this removes that power dynamic for what we're looking for. We're not just looking at the what is the content being taught and, is this here, but what is actually going on with students and how are they feeling about that? Even encouraging that what happens is that sometime during the day that we actually go ahead and maybe just walk with the student. A coach walks with the student and just talks to them casually about their day and what's going on. Another thing that's happening here in Pasadena, and this will be kind of connected to this work, is we have many of our district leaders who are going to be mentors for our middle school students and this population of students. I had an interview today to see who I'd be paired with, but this would be really interesting to get that deep with a student on a kind of a weekly basis with them and meet with them to find out not only how their experiences is here, but how can we change that and for the better.
In order for us to sustain this work, we've kind of taken a step towards it already to see how it would work out. So I will use Nadira's words, removing the power dynamic. Part of our grant involved the administrators being at the table with the teachers when learning the content, when learning the routines, when modeling the strategies. We've taken that a step further and created planning sessions where they are coming together to collaboratively plan their lessons, figuring out how to embed the strategies and do all of those things. But we've also invited the administrators to the table. So when I say we've taken it a step further, our grant focuses on grade 6 for a very specific reason. But we've branched out and started offering these planning sessions for all of the elementary grade levels so that we can show them how to dig into this content not be afraid, bring the administrators to the table, because this is about planning and doing what is best for kids, not about holding up this curtain and pretending behind it that I know what I'm doing and I know all the content. So that's a step that we've already taken. We wanted to try it out while we still have this cohort. So we are once every module trying to do this and offer it voluntarily for teachers and administrators to come. One of the other things that we are going to do is tap into those parent groups. We have a division in the district, family and community engagement. They have parent liaisons in each building. And over the years, we've tried to plan evening professional development for parents. You can imagine that has not gone well because it's in the evening, time for them to be home, getting the kids ready for school the next day. So just to tap into them to see what their ideas are in terms of what might work better. Having some of them reach out to us is a good step in the right direction. It means that we are really trying to work together now on this. So hopefully taking strides in those directions will help us to sustain this. We have reached an entire body of 6th grade teachers, administrators who oversee grade 6. And this year we've also invited the other administrators from those buildings in to learn from this, to kind of do the same thing with the other grade levels in their buildings. So hopefully this will help us sustain it and branch out to support the other teachers who in our state do not have content expertise. They are not required to take a content examination. So that's our focus.
Thank you so much, Nadira and Jadon. It's so exciting to hear about the new things that are coming based on all of the information and data that you've gathered. All right, our final question for the panel is, how are you creating opportunities in year 3 and beyond for new voices and perspectives to be heard?
I'm glad to see here that some of us have read street data. I'm looking at the reactions to it in the chat. I love it as well. And one of the ideas that I love from that is the idea of starting from the margins. So who are the folks that we don't hear from enough, and how do we put their perspectives and their lived experiences at the center of our actions and start with them? And so that is the hope moving into year 3. We hope to do a series of engagements to understand assets, as well as the social and academic experiences of students with thinking and learning differences, as well as multilingual learners, specifically newcomers and students with interrupted formal education. And the goal is to learn from them and to use the things that we learn to create more inclusive programming and experiences to create more equitable outcomes. And also we hope to use what we learned there to think about how we can work with other groups who have been historically marginalized. And we also love to lean into finding innovative ways to invite more caregivers into the community. Thanks, Kendall.
Thank you so much, Erica. It's so exciting to hear the plans for this year. That is it for our panel. Before we move into questions, we want to take a moment to talk through just quickly the top 5 tips for conducting focus groups. If you have any questions now that are on your mind from the panel, please feel free to continue putting those into the chat so we can gather those and get started with those right after this. So right now you may be thinking, wow, that was a lot of information. That all sounds great, but where do I start? We have 5 recommendations for what to think about when planning to conduct focus groups. We'll share them at a high level now, but you can also find more details in the brief, which you all have access to. You may already have it, or if not, we'll make sure you get it after the webinar is over. So first off, if you couldn't tell from all of the panel members, a lot of them spoke to the importance of building trust with district and community. Before directly engaging with students and caregivers, establishing trust with district and community leaders who can help contextualize the needs of students and community is really important. Prioritize listening and learning through relationship building, provide tokens of gratitude, incentives to honor participants' time, and valuable contributions. We said it before, we'll say it again. Food is key for middle school students. We have found Capri Suns and Rice Krispie treats to be quite popular with students. And then providing compensation or food to families and caregivers, as well as welcoming younger children to the focus groups, is much appreciated and makes the environment feel more welcoming. Second, it's really important to know your assets, audience, and champions in the work. You need to identify system and community assets. Seek input from people in your organization, district, and the community to identify gaps in knowledge, better understand context, and tailor your questions to the audience that you seek to engage. Whenever possible, identify champions within the district who represent priority students' dimensions of identity, who can be conduits for knowledge gathering, dissemination, and communication. Our third tip is that structure, design, and logistics matter. When, where, and how a focus group is conducted impacts the attendance, participation, and the outcomes. We recommend offering multiple opportunities for attendees to participate at varying times of day and in locations that are accessible and comfortable to them. Be mindful of identities and power differentials among focus group facilitators, observers, and participants, and provide translation and interpretation support to ensure all participants can engage in their preferred language. Scheduling can require a really long runway, so planning ahead is essential. Even if you're not thinking to do something until next semester, you definitely want to start thinking about it now. Tip number 4, follow participants' lead. It has happened to us many times that we've gone into focus groups with an idea of what we're hoping to learn. We have our questions in mind and we think this is what we think we're going to hear. However, make sure you remain flexible, as you may not have anticipated some topics that are on participants' minds. Don't be afraid to pivot in the moment to follow where a participant goes as they respond to a question. We learned so much that we didn't anticipate by just letting students, caregivers speak to what was important to them and on their minds in the moment. After focus groups, notice the trends across conversations and adjust future questions to follow up or go deeper into what you heard. And our final tip, tip number 5, is to follow up after the focus group. You heard a lot of the panel members speak to this, but it's essential to communicate with the participants of the focus group after the focus groups are over, including sharing back the findings, checking for understanding or clarity, and providing resources to address any immediate needs expressed in the focus group. These actions are important for maintaining trust and relationships with the community, so participants can see you aren't just checking a box by asking to speak with them, but are truly honoring their time, input, and experience. As some of the panel members mentioned, this could look like a quick flyer to students saying, hey, this is what we heard, and this is the things that we're doing and what we're thinking about to follow up from your input, or providing more opportunities for caregivers and families to get involved as well. Again, you can find more information on all of that, as well as some sample questions for focus groups, many additional resources in the brief, as well as more information. So we definitely recommend going and looking at that if you would like to learn more. We're now going to move into the Q&A portion of the session. We have been collecting some questions in the chat. We'll start with a couple of those, but feel free to come off mute and ask any questions out loud, or continue to put questions in the chat that come up throughout the time. And remember, it's okay to ask a question to a particular panel member if you have a follow-up to something that they said. My colleague Chad has been collecting some of the questions, and Chad, do you have one that we can start with?
Yeah, so we'll start off with a question from M. Johnson, and they asked, were there questions from caregivers about changes in how math is taught? And we're gonna push that question to Jency to start.
Yep. Thanks, Chad. Nadira alluded to this a little bit earlier. Caregivers had some misconceptions about the curriculum itself. Some caregivers reported in focus groups that their students were in front of computers all day And that was really frustrating for the students because they wanted to work in groups and work on real world connected problems, and frustrating for caregivers who didn't experience mathematics instruction in that way. So we were able to tease out in that data that there were some missteps in implementation. Some teachers were just using the diagnostic piece and the online portion of the curriculum. So we had, we could be responsive to that through our coaching work that was led by Kim Knudsen in the district and supported by the district coaches. And then we could also give caregivers insight into the design of iReady classroom mathematics in middle school itself. So the instructional routines that are embedded in the materials, the overall structure of a lesson, a typical unit, all of that information. We partnered with Curriculum Associates that publishes iReady, and they were able to embed that into learning opportunities for caregivers as well. Great question.
Great. Our next question comes from Stephen McKinney. And Erica, I'll have you start this question. Thinking about the focus groups, is there anything you would do as a facilitator to better prepare yourself to enter into these spaces with caregivers and students? Do you have any reflections or tips about your facilitation of focus groups after the fact?
That is a great question. I think in terms of preparing yourself, vulnerability is key. So I think going into the space and positioning yourself as a learner, I think so often in the education space, we are used to being looked at as the experts, and we feel like we have to have all of the answers. But facilitating focus groups actually gives you a great opportunity to release that and to be the learner. So I think setting the stage as, you know, hearing everybody's experience is valuable, no matter how big or small the thought is. It is essential to what we all need to walk away from the space learning. And so I think it's critical to go in with that lens. Another thing is to, if sometimes you'll ask a question and it'll be silent, give a little bit of wait time. And if you need to rephrase a question, don't be afraid to do that. The point is always to make sure that you give folks the space that they need to share. So however you need to adjust in the moment, be prepared to do that.
Thank you, Erica. And our last pre-populated question comes from Jocelyn Nunez. And Jocelyn asked, did parents and caregivers have access to Canvas for updates? Nadira.
Yes. This is something new that we're starting, and this came from our community and family engagement coordinator, Nancy Molina. She's the one that told me, like, met with her, I was like, Nancy, I'm having difficulty. We're not reaching the population we really want to reach all the time. And she was the one that said that for the most part, the families we're trying to reach, as she has seen, even in hers, first of all, she said she's seen a drop in engagement in what they're doing also. They offer parent university, they offer everything. And so she's been coming up with some very unique ideas. One, I think Jadon had mentioned about these other Facebook groups and groups that parents are part of. She's finding part of that. What our family engagement does have is a Canvas page. And she asked me to take and put our, if we can take something down to like a 1, 2, no more than a 3-minute clip that they can listen to while they're cooking or while they're doing this, and then where they could get more information from it. So yes, that is something that we will be doing. Presently, we've just, up until this point, we've been mostly providing through email, through some of our regular channels that I've known about. But I think this the Canvas update shows promise because our parents go there for their students, for their classes. So it'll be another place that they can go for these things here.
Thank you so much, Nadira. I believe that's it for the questions that were submitted throughout the session. Does anyone have any additional questions you would like to ask? Em, go ahead.
Yeah, one of my questions was when you were talking about how students were wanting more time, was there were any of the, like if I look at the standards, say for 6th grade math, there's a lot. So was there any talk about, instead of having so many, focusing on like high leverage concepts?
We've already paced our curriculum to provide time for student independent work time. So the students were really asking that we honor that time, basically. So instead of giving them work to do 15 minutes, now let's turn around and go over everything together. Give them time, and they don't use the words that we do, but give them time to grapple with the mathematics. Let them see if they can figure it out before we give them an answer. So because we've structured our pacing throughout the year to ensure that we, one, cover all of the material before the state assessments, and two, that we've integrated some student work time, I think that we are meeting the demand of the students to give them this time where we slow down and let them do the work on their own.
I'm just going to add on, Jadon, one of the things I also love that you have done and that we've worked with you to like help your teachers see is just how interconnected the standards are. If you're teaching them one at a time, it does feel like a lot to cover, but if they're seeing them as an interconnected web of ideas, which is really some of the major work we've done with our teachers at the 6th grade level, because it can feel like a lot if you're trying to march through them one by one.
Thank you so much, Jadon and Mary. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, if you think of anything else or you would like to direct any questions to us at a later time, please feel free to do that. We are going to move on now to our closing poll. So you answered a poll question at the beginning around how you felt about engaging in community and stakeholder focus groups at the beginning. We'll love here now for you to respond to a similar question after hearing the strategies that we spoke about. Keep this open for about 10 more seconds if anyone else would like to respond. All right, so surprise, maybe not. We're skewing much more strongly to the strongly agree response after this, so that's great to see. At the beginning, we had a few folks in disagree. We do not have any folks in disagree this time. And very excited to see that y'all are interested and ready to engage with more stakeholders in your community. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan to close us out.
Thanks, Kendall. Just a few notes. We wanted to express real gratitude to both districts, to Pasadena and Buffalo for letting us partner with them and conduct these community stakeholder engagement events. We cannot have done it without their support, their partnership, and all the additional times we've met with them to share results and continue furthering the work that we've done. Special thanks to other members of the team who didn't speak today but are here. Kelly Baldo from Buffalo, Dr. David Rennie, Kimberly Knudsen, Stephanie Cozy from Pasadena. All are valuable members of each of our district teams and have played pivotal roles in getting this work off the ground and continuing it moving forward. We want to thank all attendees who showed up today. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share our learnings with you. And a special thank you to NIRN for their learning partnership and their support in crafting the brief and webinar and all they've done throughout the process. We extend our thanks to all of you and are very grateful that you were here today. And that's it. And Amanda Waite, we left out Amanda Waite, who didn't end up speaking, but yes, couldn't have done that without her.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate you spending this just over an hour with us. And thank you to TNTP, to Pasadena, and to Buffalo. If you need to hang on for any reason, some of us will be on to answer any lingering questions. Feel free to hop off if you need to run, and we wish you a great rest of your afternoon or evening. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.